Hello everyone, myself Purushotham, working as Assistant Professor in Department of Computer Science and Engineering, MLR Institute. In this session, I am going to explain about the types of the drivers concept. So, this is the overview of this session. So, first I am going to explain what is a driver and then I will explain what the types of the drivers. Okay. So, let's get started session now. So, coming to what is a driver. Okay. So, in last class I already explained what exactly a driver. Okay. So, suppose if you are using the JDBC, okay, the JDBC is a technology and which can be used to communicate with the database from a Java application. Means if you want to communicate the Java application to the database, we required a medium. That medium is nothing but the JDBC. Okay, and the JDBC is having what? Some specification. JDBC is a API and it is having some specification. Okay. So, that specifications will be defined by the Java vendor. That specification will be defined by the Java vendor, and based on this specification, based on this requirement, the database vendor will be develop a software. That software is nothing but the driver software. Okay. So, what is a driver software means? So, based on the JDBC, JDBC is a specification. JDBC is a API and JDBC is a specification, and so these specifications are defined by the Java vendor. Okay, and these based on this specification, every database vendor means Oracle is a database vendor, or MySQL is a database vendor, or DB2 or Sybase. So these are what the different kinds of the database vendors. So based on the Java vendor means Sun Microsystem. So the database vendor will be developed a software. That software is nothing but what? The driver software. So why we will use this driver software means to communicate what? Java application to the database. Okay, to connect your Java application to the database, we require a software. That software is nothing but the driver software. Okay, now these driver softwares can be divided into 4 types. Okay, so if you observe here, these driver software can be divided into 4 types. So first one is a type 1 driver, next type 2 driver, type 3 driver and type 4 driver. So type 1, type 2, type 3 and type 4. Okay. So type 1 driver also known what? JDBC, ODBC, bridge driver or the bridge driver, other names. A type 1 driver, other names are what? JDBC, ODBC, bridge driver, or sometimes we may call what? The bridge driver also. And type 2 driver also called the native API partly Java driver, or sometimes we may call what? The native driver. And the type 3 driver also called all Java net protocol driver, or sometimes we may call the network protocol driver, and sometimes we may call what? The middleware driver. Since we are using the middleware server, so we may call the middleware driver here. And the type 4 driver also called all Java native protocol driver, or the pure Java driver will call, since the type 4 driver the purely written in the Java programming language. So sometimes we may call the pure Java driver, or sometimes we may use what? The thin driver. Okay. So these are the other names of these drivers. Okay. Now we'll see all these drivers one by one. Now coming to the type 1 driver. So type 1, the driver, if you observe this type 1 driver, so here we are using the type 1 driver. Now the type 1 driver is taking support from the what? ODBC driver. Okay. Now if you observe the ODBC is just like a JDBC. So ODBC stands for Open Database Connectivity. So which was developed by the what? The Microsoft. So Microsoft is a company which is developed this ODBC software for what? Windows machines. Okay. So if you want to use ODBC, so compulsory we must be use only Windows machine. Why means here the type 1 driver is taking support from the ODBC. Okay. Now if you observe the Java application, if you want to connect the database, we require the driver install, but the type 1 driver is taking support from the ODBC. Type 1 driver, so directly it won't work, so compulsory it will take the support from the ODBC. Okay. Now based on the ODBC driver, okay, the type 1 driver will be work. Now, so coming to the type 1 driver, here the type 1 driver is provided by the Sun Microsystem. Okay, the type 1 driver is provided by the Sun Microsystem as a part of the JDK. Okay, so when Java was introduced, the JDK software is introduced, and in JDK itself, the first version itself, so this type 1 driver is what come along with the first version of the JDK. Means starting from the first version till 1.7 version, the type 1 driver is available. Okay, now the type 1 driver is not available, so this support is available till only 1.7 version only. Okay, so here it is comes along with the JDK, so no need to install this type 1 driver explicitly. Next, internally this driver will take a support from the ODBC driver, as I mentioned earlier. So if you want, you can see here, you are means a type 1 driver is taking what support from the ODBC driver. ODBC stands for Open Database Connectivity, so which was developed by the Microsoft only for Windows machine, only for Windows machine. Now the type 1 driver converts JDBC calls to ODBC calls, and ODBC driver converts ODBC calls to the database specific calls. If you observe here, the Java application, the ultimate goal of the JDBC is what? They need to communicate with database. Okay, so directly it is not possible, so that's why we are using what? The drivers here. But here the two drivers we are using, what will happen means the type 1 driver will be convert to what? ODBC. So means Java application call to what? ODBC specific calls, and the ODBC means that's the duty of this type 1 driver. Now ODBC to what? The database. Okay, so again we required what? ODBC driver. Okay, ODBC driver, what it does means ODBC calls to directly, it will transfer to what? The database specific calls. Means too many conversions are required. Okay, so that's why the performance wise the type 1 driver is not up to the mark. And the type 1 driver also called what? The bridge driver or the JDBC ODBC driver. Okay, so it is also called what? The bridge driver. Why means ODBC here it is act as a bridge between what? The type 1 driver to what? Database. So that's why it is called what? The bridge driver, or it is taking a support from the ODBC, so that's why it is called what? The JDBC and ODBC driver. Now, so coming to advantage of using this driver, so it is very easy to use and maintain. Okay, so why means here this software is comes along with your JDK, so here no need to install. Here you can see here the next point, we are not required to install any separate software, so because it is available with what? As a part of the JDK, so no need to install this software explicitly. So that's why it is easy to use and it is easy to maintain. So this driver won't communicate with the database directly. Okay, if you observe here, if you observe this diagram, now the type 1 driver is never communicate with the database directly, never communicate with the database directly. Here in between we are going to use what? The ODBC driver. Okay, now ODBC driver will be directly interact with the database. Means the type 1 driver, we can say that it is a database independent driver. Means the database independent driver means you may use, sometimes you may use a MySQL, no problem, the type 1 driver will be same. Sometimes you may use Oracle, no problem, so type 1 driver will remain same. And sometimes you may use a DB2, a type 1 driver, same type 1 driver you can use. And sometimes you may use what? The Sybase, no problem, you can use the same type 1 driver. Means you can change any of the database, no problem, the same the type 1 driver you can use. Why means the type 1 driver never interact with the database directly. Okay, so this is the one of the reason. Next, here problem with the database means the limitations of this type 1 driver. If you observe this type 1 driver, first of all we need to convert the Java application call to the ODBC specific calls, and ODBC specific calls to what? The database specific calls. Means too many conversions are required, so that's why the performance wise it is not up to the mark. Okay, so we can also call this is what? The snail driver. Why means we require what? The too many conversions. Next, so this driver internally depends on the ODBC driver. Okay, so as we know that the ODBC stands for Open Database Connectivity, which was introduced by the Microsoft. Microsoft is introduced for their own machine, own Windows machines, own Windows software, okay, own Windows machines. Okay, so now if you want to use a type 1 driver, the compulsory it must be what Windows machine only. If you want to use a type 1 driver in Linux, it is not possible. If you want to use a type 1 driver in a Mac, it's not possible. Why? Means the type 1 driver is restricted to what? Only Windows machine. Why? Means the type 1 driver is taking support from the ODBC. So we can say that the type 1 driver is a platform dependent driver. Why? Means it is restricting to only the Windows machine. If you want to use a Linux, it's not possible. Okay, if you want to use a Mac, it is not possible. So that's why it is a platform dependent driver. Okay, next limitation, as we know that this type 1 driver was introduced as a part of the JDK, and the support is available only till Java, means JDK 1.7 version only. So 1.8 version, this support is not available. Okay, so this is also one of the limitation. Means if you want to use in the latest version, the type 1 driver won't work. Okay, why? Means the support is available till 1.7 version only. Now these are the limitations in the type 1 driver. Now coming to the type 2 driver. Okay, now if you observe the type 1 driver and type 2 driver is exactly same. The only the difference is here earlier we have what? ODBC. Now the ODBC is replaced with a vendor provided database specific libraries. Vendors provided database specific libraries means vendor may be anything. Suppose MySQL libraries here will use. Suppose Oracle libraries will use. Suppose DB2, the DB2 related what libraries will be replaced with the ODBC. Okay, now so that is only the difference. Means the type 1 driver and type 2 driver exactly same. The only the difference is ODBC is replaced with the what? Native libraries. Okay, if you observe the same points we can see here. So it is also known the native API, the partly Java driver. Okay, native API means why? Means here we are using what? Database specific drivers. Okay, the database specific drivers is written in the native language. So that's why it is called what? Native API, or sometimes we may call what? The native driver. Okay, next type 2 driver is exactly same as a type 1 driver. As I mentioned earlier, the type 1 driver and type 2 driver exactly same. The only the difference is the type 1 driver is using what? The ODBC. That ODBC is replaced with what? The vendor specific native libraries. Okay, now vendor means if you are using Oracle related database native libraries will use. Suppose if you are using MySQL related native libraries will use. Okay, so that is the meaning of this statement. Now coming to the next statement, the type 2 driver. The type 2 driver internally uses vendor specific native libraries, okay, to communicate with the database, as I mentioned. Now these every time we are using the native. Okay, so what is a native? Means a native code is nothing but it is a non-Java code. Okay, so this native code mostly written in the C program, or sometimes we may use a C++. Now, so we have to install vendor provided native libraries on the client machine. So suppose if you want to use a type 2 driver in your application, so compulsory you need to install this vendor provided native libraries explicitly. Compulsory we need to use, otherwise this type 2 driver won't work. Now the type 2 driver converts JDBC calls to vendor specific native calls, and vendor specific calls directly will be understood by the what? The database engine. If you observe here the Java application calls will be converted to what? Vendor specific provided the database specific calls, and these calls directly understand by the what? The database. So here the conversion is not required. Here only one conversion is enough. So comparative the previous one, means a type 1 driver, so it is reduced what? Number of levels of conversion. So performance wise comparatively the type 2 driver is good enough. Okay, now so coming to advantage of using this type 2 driver. So when compared with the type 1 driver, as I mentioned, the performance is high. Why? Means here the number of levels of conversions are reduced. Okay, the earlier we have what? The 2 conversions, but here only one conversion. So the number of conversions are reduced, means the performance wise it is what okay. Now here no need to arrange ODBC driver. In type 1 driver compulsory we need to use what the ODBC driver. We need to take support from the ODBC driver. Here this ODBC driver no need to use. Okay, so that is replaced with the native libraries. Next, when compared with the type 1 driver, the portability is more, means a type 1 driver is applicable only for Windows machine. So in type 1 driver we are taking support from the ODBC. Now ODBC means it is only for Windows, but here type 2 driver is replaced with the database specific libraries. Okay, database native specific libraries, means comparatively type 1 some portability is increased here. Okay, now so coming to the limitations here, internally this driver is using the database specific native libraries and hence it is a database dependent driver. Okay, so suppose if you are using what Oracle database related drivers we need to, means that specific libraries we need to use. And suppose if you are using MySQL, the MySQL related what the native libraries compulsory we need to install. Okay, so if you are migrating your, if you are changing your databases, so compulsory we need to change your the native native libraries also. So here migration from one database to another database is what difficult here. Why means, so whenever you are changing the database, so compulsory we need to change the libraries also. Okay, so it is a database, we can say that it is a database dependent. So driver is a platform dependent driver also. So type 2 driver is a platform dependent driver. Okay, so why means, as we know that the native libraries may use what C or C++. Okay, the C or C++ is not a what the platform independent code, it's a platform dependent code. It may be changed if you are changing what, if you are changing what one operating system another operating system, so this code behavior may be changed. Okay, so we can say that this driver also what the platform dependent driver. Okay, so it is both database dependent as well as the platform dependent. Okay, so on client mission compulsory we should install the database specific native libraries. Okay, so compulsory explicitly we need to install the database specific native libraries, otherwise this won't work. Okay, and last point, there is no guarantee every database vendor will be provide this driver. Okay, so the ODBC driver we are replaced with the database specific native libraries, right? Now this database specific native libraries every database vendor is not providing. Okay, suppose if we take an example, Oracle is providing what the type 2 driver. Okay, and it is providing the native libraries too. But if you check MySQL is won't providing what the type 2 driver and it is not providing any native libraries. Okay, so this is also one of the limitation we can say. And so coming to the type 3 driver. So type 3 driver also known as all Java net protocol driver or network protocol driver or the middleware driver. So it is also called all Java network protocol driver or network protocol driver, or we may use what middleware driver. Okay, so next type 3 driver converts JDBC calls to middleware specific calls, middleware server specific calls, and middleware server specific call convert toward the middleware specific calls toward the database specific calls. So you can see here the as previous I already explained the type 1 driver, just like a type 1 driver, type 3 driver also behaving the same, means it will convert toward the middleware, means Java application to the middleware drivers understandable calls and middleware toward the database understandable what the calls. Okay, here the too many conversions are required. Next point, internally middleware driver server may use a type 1 driver or type 2 driver or type 4 driver. Okay, why not to type 3 means we are discussing about the type 3 only. Okay, so here middleware also one of the server. So this server if you want to connect with what the database, so here to connect the middleware to what, here middleware to what the database, here we may use what the type 1 or we may use a type 2 or we may use a type 3. Sometimes we may use a type 1, sometimes we may use a type 2, sometimes we may use what the type 3. Okay, now so on client side we need to install these two on client side, this is your own Java application, and type 3 driver we need to install on the client machine. On server side, we need to install what? The middleware server. Okay. Now, I will explain these points. Now, coming to advantage of using this driver. So, this driver won't communicate with the database directly. You can see here, this driver, type 3 driver never communicate with the database directly. Okay, middleware driver is connecting, it is connecting directly with what database, but the type 3 driver never communicate with the database directly. So, we can say that the type 3 driver is a database independent. Database independent means you can change this database if you want. If you want, you can use Oracle. If you want, you can use Sybase. If you want, you can use DB2 or any other database. So, type 3 driver will be remains the same. Okay. So, that's why it is called what? Database independent driver. And we can also call that this driver is a platform independent driver. Okay, the platform independent driver. So, how it is a platform independent driver means, if you observe the first point, it is all Java Net Protocol driver, means this driver is written in the Java programming language. As we know that the Java is a platform independent. Okay, so this driver also what the platform independent. Why means this driver is developed in Java programming language. As we know that Java is a platform independent code. Okay, platform independent. Now, if you observe here, this driver is both database independent as well as what? The platform independent. Next, so no need to use ODBC driver or no need to use what? Vendor specific native libraries. So, here we no need to use any ODBC driver and we no need to install any other vendor specific native libraries. But here we need to install what? One server. Okay, that's what? One middleware server we need to install. Okay, that is the limitations. Now, we will coming to the limitation. Because of having the middleware server, in middle we have what? The middleware server is there. Okay, so there may be chance of the performance problem. Why means too many conversions are required. The first we need to convert the Java application call to the middleware understandable calls and a middleware to what? The database. Too many conversions are required, the performance wise not up to the mark. Okay, so we may get what? The performance problems if you are using the type 3 driver. And we need to purchase a middleware server, hence the cost of the project is more. Okay, so here if you want to work with the type 3 driver, compulsory we need to install the middleware server, and middleware server if you want to install, so we need to pay and we need to use that. So, if you are using the middleware server, the cost of the project will be increased. Okay, so the best example is IDS server, Internet Database Access Server. So, if you want to use this IDS server, so compulsory we need to pay and we need to use. So, if you are using this IDS, so what we need to do means, here we need to pay something. So, it will increase what? The project cost. Okay, so this is also one of the limitation. And if you observe this type 3 driver, if you compare with the type 1 and type 2, so type 3 driver is only the driver which is both platform independent as well as the database independent driver. So, if you compare with the type 1, type 2 and the type 3 driver is recommended to use. Okay, so coming to the last driver, the type 4 driver. Okay, so this is also known as a pure Java driver or a thin driver. So, why is a pure Java driver means? The type 4 driver is a purely written in the Java programming language. It is not written in any other native code. It is a purely what is written in the Java code. Okay. Next, it is a thin driver. So, why it is a thin driver means, here in previous case in type 1 driver we are taking support from the ODBC. In type 2 driver we are taking support from the native libraries, and in type 3 driver we may use what? The middleware server. Okay, so type 1 is taking support from the ODBC, type 2 is taking from the support from the native libraries, and the type 3 is using what? The middleware server. So, all these are eliminating in what? The type 4 driver. Okay, if you compared with the the architecture also, you can see here there is no what? The middle person here. So, if you compare with the type 1, type 2, type 3, so it is somewhat thin. Okay, so that is also, that's known as what? It is a thin driver. Okay, that's why it is called what? Thin driver. Now, coming to the type 4 driver, now we will see all the points. So this driver is developed to communicate with the database directly without taking support from the ODBC and without supporting what the vendor specific native libraries and without support from what middleware server. Okay, so no need to use what the ODBC driver, no need to use what vendor specific native libraries, or no need to use what the middleware server. So the type 4 driver is eliminating all these things. So next, this driver uses the database specific native protocols to communicate with the database. So here this driver internally it is using what the database specific native protocols to communicate with what the database, and here it is database specific protocols, means every database is providing what this driver. Okay, suppose if you are using the MySQL is providing what driver, what the connector J driver. So that is very specific to what MySQL only. Okay, so this native protocol, so how it will be connected to your database means it will be connected based on the database specific native protocols. Okay, now next, this driver converts JDBC calls to what directly database specific calls. Okay, so directly it will be communicate. So if you observe here the type 4 driver, here suppose if you are using the MySQL, the MySQL is providing a driver, that is what the connector J driver. Connector J driver. Now this connector J is a driver which is provided by the MySQL. Okay, so all these protocols and everything will be defined in the connector J. So the Java application directly will be communicated with what this driver, and this driver, these calls directly will be understood with the database. You can see this point, this driver converts JDBC calls directly to the database specific calls. It is reduced to what the number of levels of conversions, right? So performance wise it is up to the mark. Okay, so it is and recommended to use. So this driver is developed only in Java. Okay, so that's why it is a pure Java driver, as we know that. So this type 4 driver also called the pure Java driver. What is the reason means this driver is purely written in the Java programming language. So that's why it is what the pure Java driver. And so because of this type 4 driver is a platform independent driver. Okay, as we know that this pure Java driver is developed in only Java. As we know that if any driver, if any program, if it is written in the Java programming language, so that is what the platform independent. Platform independent. Okay, in Java buzzwords we already studied what, so the Java is a platform independent. Okay, so this driver is purely written in the Java. So this driver, type 4 driver is a platform independent driver, we can say that. Okay, so this driver won't require any native protocol, native libraries at a client side, hence it is a lightweight driver. So it is also called what the lightweight driver. Why means we no need to use any of the native libraries, so it is what the lightweight driver. So because of this, okay, it is eliminating ODBC driver, it is eliminating what vendor specific native protocols, and it is eliminating what the middleware server, so that we can say that it is what the 10 driver. Okay, so these are the different names of these drivers. Sometimes we may call the thin driver, sometimes we may call the lightweight driver, sometimes we may call the pure Java driver. So these are the different names of the type 4 drivers. Now coming to advantage of using this type 4 driver, it won't require any native libraries. As I mentioned, it is eliminated what native libraries, it is eliminated what ODBC driver, it is eliminated what the middleware server, it is eliminated. Means the type 4 driver is eliminated all these things. Next, it is a platform independent driver. Okay, so it is a platform independent driver. So this is advantage, right? So why means this driver is developed in the Java programming language. So as we know that if any driver, if it is developed in the Java programming language, that becomes what the platform independent. Next, it uses vendor specific native protocols, hence security is more. Okay, so this point. So as I mentioned, if you are using what MySQL database, the MySQL is providing what connector J software, and MySQL only developed this connector J. MySQL only developed this connector J. Okay, we are not using any other third party what the driver, we are using the MySQL provided driver only. Okay, so that it is providing what as high security compared with what other drivers. The only limitation of this type 4 driver is, it is a database dependent driver. The database dependent driver means if you are migrating from one database to another database, okay, so suppose if you are if you may use what MySQL, the MySQL related type 4 driver we need to use. Suppose if you are using the DB2 related type 4 driver we need to use, or if you are using Sybase related type 4 driver we need to use. Means if you are migrating one database to another database, so compulsory this driver also we need to change, so otherwise it won't work. Okay, so the best example here, the Oracle is providing the driver, okay, so thin driver, and MySQL also providing what, a type 4 driver, that is a connected J driver. Okay, so coming to the summary of the session. So in this session I explained what a driver software definition. Okay, so what is a driver and how it is developed, I explained. And the types of the drivers, driver categorization I explained, like a type 1 driver, type 2 driver, type 3 driver and type 4 driver explained. And every driver is having some advantages and every driver is having some limitations. Okay, so every driver, type 1 driver, type 2 driver, type 3, type 4 driver, all advantages and limitations are explained. Okay, so that's about this session. Thank you.